Brooks didn't wait for the preacher to finish the final prayer before he tucked the divorce papers into the black lace of Tessa's funeral shawl, his eyes already searching for the mistress waiting in the car. Welcome to a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about loyalty, worth, and the people who claim to love you. If you've ever been underestimated or abandoned when you needed support the most, you're in the right place. Today, we're witnessing Tessa's transformation from complete devastation to unstoppable power, and something tells me her journey will speak directly to your soul. Before we start, I want to ask you something. Wherever you are in the world right now, whatever city or country you're calling home, drop it in the comments. Let's build something real here. Let's show each other we're not alone in this. And then if you're already feeling this energy, the subscribe button is right there. One click tells me you're ready for stories that don't just entertain, they transform. Now, let's begin. The November wind carried the smell of overturned earth and wet chrysanthemums. Tessa stood at the edge of her father's grave, one hand pressed against the swell of her belly where their daughter kicked and turned, the other clutching a single white carnation she couldn't afford to buy. Someone from the neighborhood had left it on their doorstep that morning, wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her father had died in the VA hospital with her holding his calloused hand, the same hand that had worked 3 jobs to keep her fed after her mother left when she was 7. The same hand that never once raised itself in anger, even when the electricity got shut off or when they ate pasta with butter for dinner 5 nights straight. The funeral home had given her a compassionate discount that still cost more than she had in her account. Brooks had refused to help pay for it. "Your father, your problem," he'd said 3 days ago, not looking up from his phone. "I'm not throwing good money after a man who lived like he was allergic to success." Now Brooks stood beside her in a suit she'd never seen before, charcoal gray, Italian cut, with cufflinks that caught the light. He smelled like cologne that cost what her father used to make in a week. When had he bought that suit? She tried to remember the last time they'd had money for anything beyond rent and groceries. The preacher was talking about resurrection and eternal peace, and his words forming clouds in the cold air. There were maybe 15 people scattered around the grave. Most of them were from the VFW post where her father had volunteered. Not family. Her father hadn't had family, not really, just her. And now, she didn't have him. Tessa felt the tears come, hot and silent, tracking down her cheeks and dripping off her chin. She didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. Let the earth take them the way it was taking her father. That's when she felt Brooks lean close, his breath warm against her ear. "Sign these." She turned her head, confused. He was holding papers, white, crisp, official-looking papers with a blue backing. "What?" "Divorce papers." He said it the way someone might say grocery list or dentist appointment. Matter of fact, already decided. "I had them expedited. Sign them now, and we can file Monday morning." The preacher's voice faltered. Someone coughed. The sound of it echoed wrong in the sudden quiet. Tessa looked at the papers, then at Brooks. His face was smooth, composed. He'd practiced this, planned it, chosen this exact moment deliberately. "You're divorcing me," she said slowly, testing the words to see if they made sense. "At my father's funeral. The timing isn't ideal, but we need to settle this quickly." Brooks tucked the papers into the folds of her shawl, letting them rest against her collarbone. "I've already moved my things out. The apartment lease is up in 2 weeks. You'll need to find somewhere else. I've met someone, Tessa, Victoria Hartfield. Her family owns Hartfield Capital Management. She's pregnant too, and unlike you, she actually comes from something. And she can give me the life I deserve. The words landed like fists, each one calculated to hurt. Tessa's knees felt loose, unsteady. The ground beneath her seemed to tilt. Victoria Hartfield, she repeated. The name tasted like copper in her mouth. You're leaving me, 6 months pregnant, on the day I bury my father, for Victoria Hartfield. I'm leaving you because I can't afford to stay, Brooks corrected. Do you understand what it's been like? Watching you waste your time, taking care of a man who wouldn't even try to better himself. Your father could have done something with his life, but he chose to live like a hermit in that rotting apartment, counting pennies. And now, you're going to end up just like him. Poor, forgotten, raising a kid in poverty. I'm not signing up for that future. Someone behind them gasped. One of the VFW guys, a man named Gus, with a grey beard and kind eyes, stepped forward. Son, this isn't the time or place. I'm not your son, Brooks said, without looking at him. And this is exactly the time. Tessa needs to understand reality. There's no inheritance coming. There's no hidden savings account. Her father died with $17 in his checking account and a social security check that'll bounce because he's dead. I checked. He checked. He'd gone through her father's finances, while the man was dying. Tessa felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been holding her together. But she didn't fall apart. Not yet. She was her father's daughter. She knew how to keep standing when the world tried to knock her down. So, you're taking everything, she said quietly. The car? It's in my name. The savings we had for the baby? I emptied the account yesterday. You weren't contributing anyway. I was on bed rest, doctor's orders, because of the bleeding. Brooks shrugged. Not my problem anymore. Sign the papers, Tessa. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Across the cemetery, Tessa could see the Mistress now. Victoria Hartfield stood beside a silver Mercedes, wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Tessa's entire wardrobe. She was scrolling through her phone, bored, waiting for Brooks to finish discarding his wife so they could move on with their afternoon. The preacher had stopped talking entirely. Everyone was staring. Tessa reached for the papers. Her hands were shaking, but she took them. She looked down at the words, petition for dissolution of marriage, and something in her went very still. I'll sign, she said. Brooks relaxed. Good. Be smart about this. But not here. Tessa folded the papers carefully, tucked them into her purse. I'm going to read every word. I'm going to find a lawyer, and I'm going to make sure that when this is over, you don't get to walk away clean. Brooks laughed. Actually laughed, the sound sharp and ugly in the sacred quiet of the cemetery. A lawyer? With what money? You can't even afford to bury your father without charity. You think you can afford legal representation? He turned and walked away. Just like that. Didn't wait for her response, didn't look back. He crossed the grass to where Victoria stood, slipped an arm around her waist, and kissed her cheek. The Mistress smiled. They got into the Mercedes together, and the car pulled away, leaving Tessa standing at her father's grave with 15 witnesses and a belly full of a child whose father had just chosen money over her. Gus moved to her side. He didn't say anything, just stood there, solid and present. I'm okay, Tessa whispered. No, you're not, Gus said gently, but you will be. The preacher cleared his throat and resumed the prayer. Tessa barely heard it. She was looking down at her father's casket, at the cheap brass handles and the spray of carnations across the top that the funeral home had included in the compassionate discount package. Her father had taught her that dignity wasn't about money, that a man's worth wasn't measured by his bank account, but by how he treated people when no one was watching. The Brooks had just shown her exactly what he was worth, and as they lowered her father into the ground, Tessa made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would raise her daughter, and she would never, ever let anyone make her feel worthless again. The first shovelful of dirt hit the casket with a hollow thud that sounded like an ending. But Tessa was already thinking about beginnings. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday. Tessa found it taped to the apartment door when she came back from the free clinic, where a tired nurse had checked her blood pressure and told her the baby was healthy, but she needed to reduce stress. The nurse had said it kindly, the way you tell someone to stop the rain. The notice was printed on yellow paper. It gave her 72 hours. She stood in the hallway with her hand on the doorknob and reading the words over and over: failure to pay rent, breach of lease agreement, vacate premises by Friday, November 17th, 5 p.m. Brooks had paid the rent from his account every month. Now that account was closed, and the landlord didn't care about divorce papers or funeral expenses or the fact that Tessa was 6 months pregnant and had nowhere to go. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as Brooks had left it, with half of everything gone. His clothes, his books, his laptop, his side of the bathroom cabinet. He'd even taken the decent coffee maker and left her with the one that sputtered and leaked. The space felt amputated. Rooms that used to be theirs were now just hers, and hers alone felt like a punishment. Tessa set her purse down on the kitchen counter and made herself breathe. 72 hours. And she had $234 in her checking account. The lawyer she'd found through legal aid had taken one look at her case and said Brooks was within his rights to empty their joint account before filing. Should he have done it? No. But is it illegal? Also no. The lawyer had kind eyes and a tired voice. She'd helped Tessa file a response to the divorce petition pro bono, but she'd been honest. Without significant assets to divide, this'll move fast. He's not asking for custody. He's barely acknowledging the child. Judge will grant the divorce in 60 to 90 days. You'll get whatever child support the state calculates, and that'll be it. $234. 72 hours. One 6-month-old in her belly who deserved better. Tessa sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, trying to figure out who she could ask for help. The list was painfully short. Most of her friends had drifted away over the years. Brooks hadn't liked them, said they were unmotivated or too dramatic. She'd let those relationships fade because it was easier than fighting. Now she was alone. She called her old college roommate Dana. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She called her former boss from the bookstore where she'd worked before the pregnancy complications. He answered on the second ring, sounded genuinely sorry about her father, but said he'd already filled her position. If anything opens up after the baby comes, give me a call. After the baby comes. As if she had that kind of time. Tessa put the phone down and pressed her palms flat against the table. Her father used to sit here in the mornings, drinking black coffee and reading the newspaper. He'd always read the obituaries first. Gotta see who made it and who didn't, he'd say. Like it was a game, like death was just another score to check. She wondered if anyone had read his obituary. She'd paid $47 to have it printed in the local paper. 3 lines. Name, date of birth, date of death. No service information because the service was already done. No in lieu of flowers, because there was nowhere to send them. The apartment felt too quiet. Tessa stood up and walked to her father's old room. The room Brooks had used as a home office for exactly 2 months before deciding he preferred working at coffee shops. The room was empty now, except for a folding chair and a stack of cardboard boxes. Her father had lived with them for the last 8 months of his life. He'd been too sick to stay in his own place, and Tessa had insisted. Brooks had hated it. He'd complained constantly about the smell of medication and the way her father shuffled to the bathroom at night, bumping into walls. "Why can't he go to a home?" Brooks had asked. "Because I'm his home," Tessa had said. Now her father was gone, and so was Brooks, and she was standing in an empty room trying to figure out how to keep a roof over her head. She opened the closet. Her father's things were still inside, the few boxes she'd packed from his apartment after he moved in. She hadn't had the heart to go through them yet. Clothes, mostly. Some books. A tackle box filled with old fishing lures he'd never used. A photo album with pictures of her as a child, gap-toothed and grinning. Tessa pulled out the photo album and sat down on the floor. She flipped through the pages slowly. There she was at 7, standing in front of their old apartment building, holding a sign that said, "First day of school." There she was at 12, at the science fair, standing next to a volcano made of papier-mâché. There she was at 18, in her high school graduation gown, her father beside her, in his only suit, the one he'd worn to every important occasion until it literally fell apart. Every photo told the same story. Her father had been there, always, for every moment that mattered. And now, he wasn't. Tessa closed the album and wiped her eyes. She needed to stop crying. Crying didn't pay rent. Crying didn't find apartments. Crying didn't... Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. "Hi, Tessa. This is Victoria. Brooks gave me your number. I wanted to reach out woman to woman. I know this situation is difficult, but I hope we can handle it maturely. Brooks and I are planning a small engagement party next month, and it would mean a lot if there's no drama. He's really excited about starting fresh with me and our baby. I'm sure you understand. Wishing you the best." Tessa read the message 3 times. An engagement party, next month, while she was being evicted. She started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again. Deleted again. What could she possibly say to the woman who'd knowingly destroyed her marriage? What words existed for that kind of betrayal? In the end, she wrote nothing. She blocked the number and set the phone down. But something had shifted. Not broken. Tessa was already broken. This was different. This was the moment where broken things decide whether to stay in pieces or become something else entirely. She stood up, put the photo album back in the box, and made a decision. She would not beg. She would not collapse. She would not give Brooks or Victoria or anyone else the satisfaction of watching her fail. She had 72 hours. She would use them. That night, Tessa packed everything she owned into 4 duffel bags and 6 cardboard boxes. It took 3 hours. When she was done, her entire life fit into the trunk of a car she no longer owned. She called Gus from the VFW. He answered on the first ring. "I need help," she said. "I'm being evicted. And I don't have anywhere to go." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Gus said without hesitation. He showed up with his truck and his wife, Dorothy, who took one look at Tessa and pulled her into a hug that smelled like lavender and laundry detergent. "You're coming home with us," Dorothy said, "and I don't want to hear any arguments." Tessa tried to argue anyway. "I can't impose. I'll figure something out." You can, and you will, Dorothy said firmly. We've got a guest room and a bathroom and 3 meals a day. You'll stay until you're back on your feet. Gus loaded the boxes into the truck. He didn't ask questions, didn't make her explain, just worked, steady and quiet, until everything was loaded. They drove through the city in silence. Tessa watched the lights blur past, her forehead pressed against the cold window. But somewhere out there, Brooks was celebrating, toasting champagne with Victoria, planning their engagement party, picking out baby names for a child who would grow up never knowing what it meant to struggle. And Tessa was going to live in a stranger's guest room, sleeping on charity. But at least she was still standing. The guest room in Gus and Dorothy's house was small but clean. White walls, a double bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with a mirror. Dorothy had put fresh flowers on the nightstand, daisies in a mason jar. Bathrooms across the hall, Dorothy said, showing her around. Towels are in the closet. Breakfast is at 7, but if you need to sleep in, that's fine too. You're not a guest, Tessa. You're family. Tessa's throat felt tight. Thank you. I'll pay you back. As soon as I find work, I'll... You'll do no such thing, Dorothy interrupted. Your father was one of Gus's best friends. We're honored to help his daughter. After Dorothy left, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the day. The eviction notice, the text from Victoria, the boxes in the truck containing everything she had left. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. $234. She had to find work, something that paid cash, something that didn't require her to be on her feet for 8 hours because the doctor had said prolonged standing could trigger early labor. She scrolled through job listings until her eyes burned and the words blurred together. Finally, she set the phone down and lay back on the bed. Above her, the ceiling fan turned slowly, and its shadow moving across the white ceiling in lazy circles. Tessa put her hand on her belly and felt her daughter kick. It's just you and me now, she whispered. But I promise you, baby girl, we're going to be okay. Your grandfather taught me how to survive, and I'm going to teach you the same thing. The baby kicked again, as if in agreement. Tessa closed her eyes and for the first time in 3 days fell asleep. She didn't dream of Brooks or Victoria or eviction notices. She dreamed of her father, sitting at the kitchen table, reading the obituaries, smiling at her across the newsprint. You're tougher than you think, he said in the dream. You always have been. And when she woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee and pancakes, Tessa believed him. What Tessa didn't know yet, what no one knew, was that her father had been playing a longer game than anyone could have imagined. And Brooks Chambers had just activated the trap that would change everything. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the funeral. Tessa was sitting at Gus and Dorothy's kitchen table, circling job listings in the newspaper with a red pen, when Dorothy brought in the mail. This one's for you, Dorothy said, handing her a thick cream-colored envelope. Looks official. The return address read, Whitmore and Associates, Estate Attorneys. The firm's name was embossed in gold lettering that caught the morning light. Tessa's stomach dropped. Her first thought was debt collectors, medical bills from her father's final hospital stay, something else she couldn't afford to pay. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter on heavy cardstock paper, the kind that lawyers used when they wanted you to understand they were serious. She read it once, then twice, then a third time because the words didn't make sense. Dear Ms. Chambers, We are writing to inform you of your father's estate and to request your presence at our offices for the reading of his will. As the sole beneficiary, you are required to appear in person to verify your identity and receive pertinent information regarding your inheritance. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to schedule an appointment. This matter requires immediate attention. Sincerely, Lionel Whitmore, Esquire. Tessa stared at the letter. Inheritance. Estate. The words felt like they were written in a foreign language. "What is it?" Dorothy asked, leaning against the counter. "I think it's a mistake," Tessa said slowly. "They're talking about my father's estate. But he didn't have anything. He died with $17 in his bank account." Dorothy moved closer, reading over Tessa's shoulder. Her eyebrows rose. "Whitmore and Associates. That's not a small firm, honey. They're downtown. Big glass building. They don't handle estates worth $17. Tessa looked up at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you should call them." Tessa called from the landline in Gus's study, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. A receptionist answered. "Whitmore and Associates. How may I direct your call?" "This is Tessa Chambers. I received a letter about my father's estate." "One moment, please." The hold music was classical. Mozart, maybe. Tessa didn't know music like that. She pressed the phone against her ear and waited. A man's voice came on the line. Deep, cultured, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who spent their days in boardrooms. "Miss Chambers, this is Lionel Whitmore. Thank you for calling. I've been expecting to hear from you." "I think there's been a mistake," Tessa said quickly. "The letter talks about my father's estate, but he didn't have an estate. He barely had anything." "I assure you, Ms. Chambers, there is no mistake." Whitmore's tone was patient, but firm. "Your father, Raymond Cole, was my client for 32 years. He retained our services shortly after your mother left. I've been managing his affairs ever since." "Managing what affairs?" "He lived in a one-bedroom apartment and drove a car from 1997. "Yes," Whitmore said. "He did. Deliberately." "Ms. Chambers, I'd prefer to discuss the details in person. Can you come to our offices tomorrow? Say 10 a.m.? "I don't understand." "You will," Whitmore said. "Tomorrow at 10. I'll have my assistant send you the address." He hung up before she could ask anything else. Tessa stood in Gus's study, holding the phone, feeling like the floor had turned liquid beneath her feet. Whitmore and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. The lobby had marble floors and a fountain that burbled expensively in the center. Tessa took the elevator up, wearing the only professional outfit she owned, a black dress she'd bought for job interviews 4 years ago that now pulled tight across her pregnant belly. The receptionist smiled and directed her to a conference room. Lionel Whitmore was waiting inside. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, and with the kind of calm authority that came from decades of handling other people's secrets. He stood when she entered and extended his hand. "Miss Chambers, thank you for coming." "Mr. Whitmore." Tessa shook his hand, then sat down in the leather chair he indicated. The room smelled like furniture polish and old money. Whitmore settled into his seat and opened a leather portfolio. "First, let me express my condolences for your loss. Your father was an exceptional man, one of the most remarkable clients I've ever had the privilege to represent." "I appreciate that," Tessa said carefully, "but I'm still confused about why I'm here." "Your father left specific instructions," Whitmore said. "He wanted me to wait until after the funeral to contact you. He believed you needed time to grieve, without the complication of legal matters. But now, we need to move forward. He pulled out a document and slid it across the table. Tessa looked down. It was a will. Her father's signature was at the bottom, dated 2 months before he died. Your father's estate, Whitmore said, is valued at approximately $4 billion. The room went silent. Tessa heard the words, but they didn't land. They just hung in the air. Impossible. Absurd. I'm sorry, she said finally. Did you say billion? Yes. That's not possible. It's not only possible, Miss Chambers. It's documented, verified, and currently sitting in a combination of trust funds, real estate holdings, stock portfolios, and liquid assets. Whitmore leaned forward. Your father was Raymond Cole, but he was also Raymond Colston. Does that name mean anything to you? Tessa shook her head. Colston Technologies, Whitmore said. Your father founded it in 1986. He sold it in 1993 for $600 million. He took that money and invested it brilliantly for the next 3 decades. He owned commercial properties across 6 states. He held significant shares in tech companies, pharmaceuticals, renewable energy. He lived modestly, but he was one of the wealthiest men in the state. Tessa felt like she was falling. Why? Why would he live like that if he had money? Because he was testing, Whitmore said quietly. Testing you, and testing the people around you. Testing what? Whitmore pulled out another document. This one was titled Posthumous Loyalty Audit. Your father was abandoned by your mother when you were 7, Whitmore said. She left because she found out he'd sold his company. She wanted the money. When he refused to give her access to it, she disappeared. Your father never forgave that. He spent the rest of his life paranoid that anyone who came into his life, or yours, would be after his wealth. So he hid it, Tessa whispered. He did more than hide it. He designed a test. Whitmore tapped the document. This is the Posthumous Loyalty Audit. It's a conditional inheritance structure. Your father left instructions that his wealth would only be released to you under specific circumstances. Tessa's mouth was dry. What circumstances? Abandonment, Whitmore said. If you were left by your spouse within 90 days of his death, while pregnant and financially vulnerable, the full estate would transfer to you immediately. If you remained in a stable marriage, the money would remain in trust until your 40th birthday. Your father believed that real loyalty reveals itself in crisis. He wanted to see who would stand by you when they thought there was nothing to gain. The words hit her like a physical blow. Brooks, she whispered. Your ex-husband triggered the clause, Whitmore confirmed. He filed for divorce 17 hours after the funeral. He emptied your joint bank account. He left you homeless and pregnant. According to the terms of the audit, his actions constitute abandonment during financial hardship. The estate is now yours, Miss Chambers. All of it. Tessa couldn't breathe. She pressed her hand against her chest, trying to force air into her lungs. My father knew, she said. He knew Brooks would leave. I don't think he knew for certain, Whitmore said gently, but he suspected. He told me once that he'd watch Brooks during visits. Instead, the man looked at you the way someone looks at a car they're planning to trade in. Tears were streaming down Tessa's face now. Not sad tears. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for. He protected me, she said. He did. And he gave you the tools to protect yourself going forward. Whitmore slid a black credit card across the table. This is linked to your primary account. There's $10 million available immediately. The rest will be transferred into your name within 30 days, pending some standard legal procedures. You'll need financial advisors, accountants, lawyers. I can recommend several. Tessa picked up the credit card. It was heavy, metallic. Her name was embossed on it in silver letters. Tessa Marie Chambers. "What do I do?" she asked. "Whatever you want," Whitmore said. "You're a billionaire, Ms. R. Chambers. The world just opened up." Tessa looked at the card, then at the will, then at Whitmore. "Does Brooks know?" "Not unless you tell him." A strange calm settled over her. The tears stopped. Her breathing steadied. "Don't tell him," she said. "Not yet." Whitmore's eyes glinted with something that might have been approval. "What are you planning?" "I don't know yet," Tessa said. "But my father taught me patience. He taught me how to wait for the right moment. I think it's time I put those lessons to use." She stood up, still holding the credit card. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, for taking care of my father, for taking care of me." "It was my honor," Whitmore said. "Your father was right about you, by the way. He said you were stronger than you knew. I see that now." Tessa left the conference room and took the elevator down to the lobby. She walked out onto the street, where the afternoon sun was bright and cold. She stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the card in her pocket. $4 billion. Brooks had walked away, thinking he was leaving a pauper. He had no idea what he'd actually done. And Tessa was going to make very, very sure he found out on her terms. Brooks Chambers thought he'd escaped poverty. What he'd actually done was activate the wealthiest woman in the state. And she was just getting started. Tessa didn't move out of Gus and Dorothy's guest room immediately. That would have been suspicious. Instead, she stayed for another week, going through the motions of someone barely surviving, circling job ads, wearing the same 3 outfits, not accepting Dorothy's casseroles with quiet gratitude. But at night, after Gus and Dorothy went to bed, Tessa sat in the glow of her laptop and began to learn how to be rich. She hired a financial advisor, a woman named Claire Mendoza, who specialized in sudden wealth management. Claire didn't ask questions about the source. She just nodded when Tessa said, "Inheritance," and got to work setting up the infrastructure. LLCs, trusts, investment portfolios, asset protection strategies. Rule 1, Claire had said during their first meeting. Never let anyone know what you're worth unless you're paying them or suing them. Tessa liked Claire immediately. The second hire was a private investigator named Marcus Lowe. He was expensive, discreet, and very good at finding things people didn't want found. And Tessa gave him one assignment: map out everything about Brooks Chambers and Victoria Hartfield, their finances, their business dealings, their social circles, their secrets. "How deep do you want me to go?" Marcus had asked. "All the way to the bottom," Tessa said. By the end of week 2, Marcus had delivered a file 3 inches thick. Tessa read it, cover to cover. Brooks had been busy. Victoria Hartfield's family owned Hartfield Capital Management, but the company was in trouble. Bad investments, over-leveraged real estate, a partner who'd embezzled $2 million before disappearing to Costa Rica. The firm was hemorrhaging money and reputation. Brooks, it turned out, had positioned himself as the solution. According to Marcus's report, Brooks had been courting Victoria for 8 months, long before he'd divorced Tessa, and he'd presented himself as a financial consultant with connections in emerging markets. He'd promised he could turn the company around. Victoria's father, desperate to save the family business, had welcomed Brooks with open arms. The engagement wasn't about love, it was about access. Brooks was planning to marry into the Hartfield family, take a position as CFO, and use their remaining capital to launch his own investment fund. He'd already registered the company, Chambers Capital Group. He had presentations, pitch decks, meetings scheduled with potential investors. He was building an empire on the foundation of someone else's wealth. Tessa sat in the guest room, reading the file, and felt something cold and sharp crystallize inside her. Brooks hadn't just abandoned her. He'd been planning it for months. Every kind word, every moment of false comfort during her father's illness, it had all been performance. He'd been counting down the days until he could leave, and now he was about to get everything he wanted, unless Tessa stopped him. She started small. First, she bought the building where Brooks and Victoria's engagement party was being held. It was a boutique event space in the arts district called the Meridian. Marcus found out they'd put down a non-refundable deposit of $15,000. The owners were eager to sell. The property had been on the market for 6 months. Tessa paid cash, $2 million, well over asking. The sale closed in 4 days. Then she called the event coordinator and introduced herself as the new owner. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," Tessa said, her voice sweet and apologetic. "But we're doing emergency renovations. On structural issues. The building inspector says we need to close for at least 3 months. I'll be happy to refund your deposit, of course." The coordinator was furious, but there was nothing she could do. The party was in 2 weeks. There was no time to find a comparable venue. Brooks and Victoria had to cancel. Tessa heard about it through Marcus, who'd bugged Victoria's phone. Illegal, yes. But Tessa had decided that morality was negotiable when dealing with people who had none. Victoria's voice on the recording was shrill with frustration. "This is humiliating, Brooks. Everyone's already RSVP'd. What are we supposed to tell them?" Brooks, calm as ever. "We'll reschedule. It's fine." "It's not fine. My father is already questioning whether you're the right person to help the company. Now we look incompetent." "Victoria, trust me, and I have everything under control." But he didn't, because 2 days later, Hartfield Capital Management received a very generous offer. An anonymous investor, operating through a shell company registered in Delaware, offered to inject $20 million into Hartfield Capital in exchange for a 40% stake and a seat on the board. The offer came through a reputable investment bank. It included a full due diligence package. It was legitimate, professional, and exactly what the Hartfield family needed. Victoria's father accepted within 48 hours. What he didn't know was that the anonymous investor was Tessa. And what Brooks didn't know was that the seat on the board came with stipulations. One of them was that all current executives and consultants had to be re-vetted by an independent financial review team. Brooks's background check came back clean. He'd never done anything technically illegal. But the financial review team found something interesting. Brooks had been inflating his credentials. The emerging markets connections he'd claimed didn't exist. The successful portfolio management he'd referenced was actually a series of minor stock trades he'd made in college. He had an MBA from a decent school, but he'd never worked at the firms he claimed to have worked at. He wasn't a financial consultant. He was a very good liar. The review team presented their findings to Victoria's father, along with a recommendation: terminate the relationship with Mr. Chambers immediately. Victoria's father called Brooks into his office on a Friday afternoon. Tessa had Marcus's audio recording of the conversation by Saturday morning. You lied to us." Victoria's father's voice was tight with controlled rage. "I may have embellished some details, but you don't embellish your employment history, son. You don't invent connections that don't exist." Do you understand what you've done? My daughter is pregnant with your child, and you're a fraud. I'm not a fraud. I can still help this company. I have ideas, strategies. Based on what experience? You've never managed anything larger than your own credit card debt. Get out of my office and stay away from my daughter. Victoria won't let you do this. She loves me. Victoria will do what's best for this family. That's how we survive. Now get out, before I have security remove you. There was the sound of a chair scraping, footsteps, a door slamming. Tessa listened to the recording 3 times. Then she smiled. Brooks tried to salvage the relationship. He called Victoria 63 times in 2 days. She didn't answer. He showed up at her apartment. Her doorman turned him away. He sent flowers, apology letters, desperate texts. Victoria finally responded with a single message. My lawyer will be in touch regarding custody arrangements and child support. Do not contact me again. Brooks's world was collapsing. The engagement was off. His position with Hartfield Capital was gone. His dream of launching Chambers Capital Group evaporated because he had no investors, no credibility, and no way forward. He'd lost everything, and he still didn't know who was behind it. Tessa watched from a distance as Brooks scrambled. She saw him move out of the luxury apartment he'd been sharing with Victoria and into a studio on the wrong side of town. She saw him start working at a corporate consulting firm, not as a partner or executive, but as a junior analyst making $60,000 a year. She saw him drive a used Honda because he'd leased the BMW he'd been driving and couldn't afford the payments anymore. She saw him become exactly what he'd been so afraid of becoming: ordinary. But Tessa wasn't done. One afternoon, 6 weeks after the financial review, Tessa walked into a boutique on 5th Avenue. She was 7 months pregnant now, glowing and healthy. She wore a navy blue maternity dress that cost more than Brooks's monthly rent, and her hair was styled in loose waves that had taken her stylist an hour to perfect. She was shopping for baby furniture. The salesperson, a cheerful woman named Kim, led her through the store, and showing her cribs and changing tables and rocking chairs made from sustainable wood harvested by artisan craftspeople in Scandinavia. This is our most popular set, Kim said, gesturing to a nursery display that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. It's the Chloe collection. Crib, dresser, changing table, rocking chair, $12,000 for the complete set. I'll take it, Tessa said without hesitation. Wonderful. Let me get the paperwork started. How would you like to pay? Tessa pulled out her black credit card. This is fine. Kim took the card, then paused. She looked at the name, then at Tessa, then back at the card. Chambers, she said slowly. Yes. You're not related to Brooks Chambers, are you? Tessa's pulse quickened. Why do you ask? He came in here about 2 months ago. He was with his fiancée, or girlfriend. I'm not sure. They were looking at this exact set. She wanted to buy it, but his card was declined. It was awkward. They left pretty quickly. Tessa smiled. No relation. Good, Kim said with a laugh. That guy seemed like bad news. She processed the payment and arranged for delivery. Tessa left the store feeling lighter than she had in months. By week 8, Brooks had hit bottom. His apartment was a 400-square-foot box with thin walls and neighbors who fought at 2 a.m. His job was soul-crushing. He wrote reports that no one read and sat in meetings where no one listened to him. His daughter with Victoria was born, a healthy girl named Sutton, and he was allowed supervised visits twice a month because Victoria's lawyers had convinced the judge that Brooks was financially and emotionally unstable. He paid child support in 18% of his gross income, which left him with barely enough to cover rent and groceries. He was trapped, and he still had no idea that the woman he'd abandoned was the one who'd orchestrated every single piece of his downfall. Brooks had spent his marriage calculating the cost of staying. Now he was about to learn the price of leaving. Tessa gave birth to her daughter on a Tuesday in February, 3 months after her father's funeral. The labor was long but smooth. 14 hours from first contraction to final push. Gus and Dorothy were in the waiting room. Claire Mendoza sent flowers. Lionel Whitmore sent a handwritten note congratulating her and offering to set up a trust fund for the baby. Tessa held her daughter for the first time in a private room at the hospital's maternity wing. The nicest wing, and where the suites had hardwood floors, and the nurses brought meals on real plates instead of trays. The baby was perfect. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Dark hair, her father's eyes, her grandfather's stubborn chin. Tessa named her Raymond. Ray for short. After my father, she whispered, touching the baby's tiny fingers. So you'll always remember where you came from. Ray yawned and fell asleep against her chest. Dorothy came in a little while later, tears streaming down her face, and held the baby like she was made of glass. She's beautiful, honey. Just beautiful. She is, Tessa agreed. Have you told Brooks? Tessa had known this question was coming. She'd been preparing for it. No, she said. And I'm not going to. Not yet. Dorothy frowned. He has a right to know he has a daughter. He gave up that right when he handed me divorce papers at my father's funeral, Tessa said quietly. He'll know when I'm ready to tell him. Not before. Dorothy didn't argue. She just kissed Tessa's forehead and went back to the waiting room to give her privacy. Tessa sat alone with her daughter, watching the way the afternoon light came through the window and turned the baby's hair gold at the edges. She'd spent 10 weeks planning Brooks's destruction. Now it was time to finish it. 2 weeks after Ray was born, Tessa arranged a meeting. She told Brooks it was about finalizing the divorce. He'd been avoiding signing the final paperwork. Something about wanting to review the terms one more time, even though there were no terms. No assets to divide. He's no custody to negotiate because he didn't know the baby existed. They met at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory. Brooks arrived 10 minutes late, looking worse than Tessa had ever seen him. His suit was wrinkled. His face was drawn. He'd lost weight. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and bad decisions. He sat down across from her and didn't say hello. Let's get this over with, he said. Tessa slid the divorce papers across the table. Sign here, and initial here. Brooks picked up the pen, scanned the documents, then paused. You had the baby, he said. I did. Boy or girl? Does it matter? I'm her father, Tessa. Are you? Tessa leaned back in her chair. Because the last time I checked, fathers don't abandon their pregnant wives at funerals. They don't empty bank accounts. They don't leave their children to be raised by someone else while they chase other women and other lives. Brooks flinched. I made mistakes. I know that. Mistakes. Tessa tasted the word. Is that what we're calling it? What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. I should have handled things differently. You should have been a decent human being. But that's not really your strong suit, is it? Brooks's jaw tightened. I didn't come here to be lectured. Then sign the papers and leave. He signed. Fast, angry strokes of the pen. Then he shoved the documents back across the table. There. Happy? Not yet, Tessa said. She pulled out a folder and set it in front of him. What's this? Your life for the past 3 months. Every financial transaction. Every lie you told Victoria's family. Every corner you cut, trying to build your little empire. Brooks opened the folder. His face went pale. How did you… Money, Tessa said simply. Money buys information. It buys access. It buys the truth about people who think they're clever enough to hide. You've been spying on me. I've been watching you self-destruct, Tessa corrected, and it's been fascinating. Did you really think you could lie your way into a fortune? Did you think no one would check your credentials? Brooks's hands were shaking. Who did this? Who ran the background check at Hartfield Capital? Tessa smiled. I did. The words hung in the air. Brooks stared at her. What? I own 40% of Hartfield Capital Management, Tessa said. I'm the anonymous investor who saved the company. I'm the one who ordered the financial review. I'm the reason you lost everything. Brooks's face went from pale to grey. That's not possible. You're broke. You were living in someone's guest room. I was, Tessa agreed. Because I chose to. Because I wanted to watch you. Because I wanted to understand exactly what kind of man walks away from his pregnant wife thinking he's trading up. She leaned forward. My father wasn't poor, Brooks. He was testing us. Testing you. And you failed spectacularly. Your father? Raymond Cole, also known as Raymond Colston, founder of Colston Technologies. He left me $4 billion. The inheritance triggered the day you filed for divorce. So every time you thought you were escaping poverty, you were actually walking away from more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. Brooks looked like he'd been hit with a hammer. $4 billion. Billion, Tessa confirmed. With a B. And you'll never see a penny of it. Because that's what the Posthumous Loyalty Audit was designed to do. It was designed to reveal who people really are when they think there's nothing to gain. You revealed yourself, Brooks. You showed me exactly what you're worth. Brooks pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loud against the floor. Other customers turned to look. This is insane. You're insane. I'm rich, Tessa said calmly. There's a difference. You can't do this. I'll sue. You'll do nothing, Tessa interrupted. Because if you try to fight me, I'll bury you. I'll make sure every person you've ever lied to knows what you did. I'll make sure Victoria's father knows you tried to manipulate his daughter into giving you access to his company. I'll make sure every potential employer sees the financial review that proved you're a fraud. You'll never work in finance again. You'll be lucky to get a job selling used cars. Brooks was breathing hard, his face red. You're vindictive. I'm fair, Tessa said. You made a choice. Now you live with it. She stood up, gathering the divorce papers. One more thing. I had a daughter. Her name is Ray. She's beautiful and healthy, and she'll grow up never wanting for anything. She'll have the best education, the best opportunities, the best life I can give her, and you'll have supervised visitation twice a month if you're lucky, because I'm going to make sure the court knows exactly who you are. You can't keep me from my daughter. I'm not keeping you from her, Tessa said. You did that yourself when you chose Victoria over us. I'm just making sure Ray understands that her value doesn't come from you. It comes from her grandfather, who knew what real wealth looks like. It comes from me, who learned how to survive when everyone said I'd fail. And it comes from herself, because she's going to grow up knowing she's enough, exactly as she is. Tessa walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Sign the child support paperwork when it arrives. I don't need the money, but you need the reminder of what you walked away from. Every month, when you write that check, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that you had everything and you chose nothing. She left before he could respond. Outside, the sun was bright and cold. Tessa walked to where her driver was waiting, a quiet man named Peter, who asked no questions and always had water bottles and tissues in the back seat. She climbed in and let out a long breath. "Where to, Ms. Chambers?" Peter asked. "Home," Tessa said. "I want to see my daughter." 3 months later, Tessa bought a house. It wasn't a mansion. She didn't need that. It was a 4-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood with good schools and old trees. It had a porch swing and a backyard where Ray could play when she got older. Gus and Dorothy came to the housewarming. So did Claire Mendoza and Lionel Whitmore and a few other people who'd become part of Tessa's new life. They ate sandwiches and drank lemonade and admired the nursery Tessa had set up, and with the Chloe collection furniture and paintings of stars on the ceiling that glowed in the dark. "Your father would be proud," Gus said, standing in the nursery doorway with Ray asleep in his arms. "I hope so," Tessa said. "I know so. You did exactly what he wanted. You stood up. You survived. You won." Tessa looked at her daughter, at her small, perfect face, and the way her fingers curled around Gus's thumb. "I didn't just survive," Tessa said quietly. "I learned what I'm worth, and I'm teaching Ray the same thing. That's the real inheritance, not the money, the knowledge that we're enough, that we always were." Gus smiled. "Your father knew that too. That's why he left the money the way he did. He wanted you to see it for yourself. He was a smart man. He was, and so are you." That night, after everyone left, Tessa sat in the rocking chair in Ray's nursery and watched her daughter sleep. She thought about Brooks, living in his studio apartment, working his corporate job, writing child support checks every month, and wondering how his life had gone so wrong. She thought about Victoria, raising her daughter alone, realizing too late that the man she'd chosen was a hollow shell of ambition with nothing substantial inside. She thought about her father, planning his legacy in secret, trusting that she would understand when the time came. And she thought about herself, about the woman she'd been at the funeral, crying in the rain with divorce papers tucked into her shawl, and the woman she'd become, holding her daughter in a house she owned outright, with a fortune she'd used to build a life of meaning. "Your grandfather taught me something," Tessa whispered to Ray. "He taught me that real wealth isn't about money. It's about who stands beside you when everything falls apart. It's about knowing your worth even when no one else does. It's about surviving the people who try to make you small." Ray stirred in her sleep, her small hand reaching out. Tessa took it gently. "You're going to grow up knowing you're valuable," she said. "Not because of what you have, but because of who you are. And if anyone tries to tell you different, you remember this story. You remember that your mother faced the worst day of her life and came out the other side stronger. You remember that your grandfather loved you before you were born. You remember that worth isn't given. It's claimed." She rocked slowly, the chair creaking a soft rhythm in the dark. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Inside, Tessa's world was full. She'd survived the funeral. She'd survived the abandonment. She'd survived poverty and betrayal and the cruel realization that the man she'd married was never the man she thought he was. And now she was here, in her own home, with her own daughter, holding a fortune that was both a gift and a test. She'd passed, and she'd make sure Ray knew how. The final scene came 6 months later. Brooks was walking out of a grocery store, carrying 2 bags of discount brand food, when he saw the billboard. It was massive, overlooking the highway. A public service announcement about financial literacy and estate planning, sponsored by the Colston Foundation. The foundation logo was simple, a mountain peak with a sunrise behind it. Underneath, in clean modern font, "True wealth is knowing your worth." Raymond Colston Brooks stood in the parking lot, staring at the billboard, the grocery bags cutting into his palms. Colston, Cole, Raymond. The pieces fell into place all at once, too late, the way truth always arrived for people like him. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and searched. Raymond Colston. The results flooded the screen. Articles, obituaries, business profiles, tech pioneer, Raymond Colston dies at 71. Colston Technologies founder leaves billions to daughter. Posthumous Loyalty Audit reveals unique estate planning strategy. Brooks read them all standing there in the parking lot while the sun set and the air grew cold and the bags cut deeper into his hands until he had to set them down. He'd walked away from $4 billion. He'd divorced a woman who was about to become one of the richest people in the state. He'd traded a queen for a con, and the con had blown up in his face, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. Brooks got in his car, drove back to his studio apartment, and sat in the dark for a long time. He thought about calling Tessa, apologizing, begging for another chance, but he knew what she'd say. She'd already said it. You made a choice. Now you live with it. And he would, for the rest of his life. The end. Final reflection. There are moments in life that define us, not by what we gain, but by what we do when everything is taken away. Tessa's father understood this. He built a test that revealed the truth about the people around his daughter. He knew that real love shows up in crisis, and in that character is proven when there's nothing to gain. Brooks Chambers failed that test the moment he chose convenience over commitment. But Tessa passed. She stood at her father's grave with nothing but grief and an unborn child. And she chose to keep standing. She survived the worst day of her life and turned it into the foundation of something stronger. That's the lesson. Not that money solves everything. Not that revenge is sweet. But that your worth isn't determined by who leaves. It's determined by who you become after they're gone. And Tessa became exactly what her father knew she could be. A woman who understood that true wealth isn't counted in dollars. It's counted in the strength to survive, the courage to stand alone, and the wisdom to know that you are always enough. And may we all learn that lesson before the world tries to teach us otherwise. Thank you for witnessing Tessa's journey. And remember, your value isn't given by others. It's claimed by you. If you made it to this moment, you didn't just watch a story, you witnessed a transformation. Tessa's father left her more than money. He left her a mirror to see her own strength. And maybe, just maybe, this story was that mirror for you too. So here's my challenge, and I'm asking this with love. If Tessa's story made you feel something, anger, hope, vindication, peace, don't let that feeling disappear into the algorithm. Hit that like button like you're claiming your worth. Subscribe like you're ready to stand in your power. And drop a comment telling me one thing. What would you do if you discovered you were worth more than the people who left you ever imagined? I dare you to let this story change how you see yourself. Because you were always the queen, the king, the legacy. You just needed the reminder. Thank you for being here. Now go reclaim your throne.